Welcome to Sunflower Movement. I am your host, Ashley Buckner. Before we get started, here's a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. I am a licensed therapist, but unless you have a signed consent form with me, I am not your therapist. This platform is not a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Sunflowers bloom in the most unexpected places, and they adjust to remain connected to the sun. Metaphorically, I define these sunflower movements as experiences with people, places, and moments where we feel seen, heard, and believed. Thank you for tuning in. All right, everyone, welcome. I'm so excited for today. Today is the first episode that I'm doing called Community Connections, where everything we're diving into is from the community. And I actually have one of my very best friends who's also a therapist here with me. Her name is Rashell Stubbs. She's a clinical mental health counselor, and she was on episode 4. So go back and listen because it's a great conversation where we talk all about tattoos and sunflowers and just therapist friendships. So yeah, welcome, Rashell. Welcome back.
I'm excited. I'm excited to be back.
You're excited to be back?
Yeah, I am.
I know. This time it's in person because I kind of got my shit figured out a little bit.
I'm glad you got your shit figured out.
I feel like I've learned so much just the last 6 months.
Just like on my side, just to watch it grow and watch you you come a long way for sure.
I know. Our episode was like the 4th episode to drop, and this will be 17.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
That's a lot.
I guess that's true. Yeah, now that I think about it, we did ours in September, I think.
Yeah, it dropped in September, so this is exciting.
Oh,
so yeah, everyone.
Awesome.
Can't wait to get into today's submissions. There's so many good submissions. Rachelle's already kind of looked through them. I looked through them. What we're going to do is we're just going to go back and forth and see what comes up and see where we go. So yeah, you ready? Should we just jump in and get going?
Let's just go.
I feel like that's going to go get the conversation. Why don't you go first?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, will you read the first one?
Yeah. So this one is, how do we heal the pain of having to have surface level only relationships with family that is firmly in and cannot learn you're fully out? It's not safe to disclose, but life feels so fake now. I mourn for them the same way I'm sure they'd mourn for me if they knew. But it's the radical pain they'd feel which keeps everything in the dark. Sigh. I feel like I can't live authentically because of this. It's tough all around.
It's interesting because when you first started reading that, I wasn't even thinking about the church. Obviously, I think they're referencing the Mormon church, they're right. That's what they're kind of referencing.
That's what I'm feeling like. Their family's still really in, and they're not at all.
Yeah, but what was coming up for me when I was first listening was being around family that aren't doing the inner work that you're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, it feels that way, huh?
It does. But I think it's the same thing. It's the same concept.
And I think that's why. So even as we read through these, as you sent them to me, I kept coming back to that one anyway.
Interesting.
Right? And so we talked, because, even before this, we'll see where this goes, right? And I think about, there's so much, I think, to me, just about the idea of surface level. When someone says surface level, so many things come to mind, at least for me, right? I can't, so it's a surface level, and it's it doesn't feel super open, and it doesn't feel I guess maybe that's what this person's talking about, is being authentic, and how do they live authentically, and if they're trying to, but you can't be authentic in a surface level relationship.
Yeah, and
how do you? I guess
it's risky.
Yeah,
it's risky to be authentic. For this person to go be around their family and not tell their family that they're not going to church, that's got to be really tough.
Yeah, they use the word radical pain that they'd feel. So they don't want to cause their family this lot, all this pain.
Yeah, well, and also too, they said they don't want to. They imagine that their family would mourn the way they mourn, which I think is so true in that setting, right? If you were to bring the parents in and talk to the parents who are true believing Mormons, you would just hear so much grief in their expression if their child had left.
Yeah.
And then it goes both ways, right? Because I think, and I feel this, I don't have a lot of family that are still members, but I feel sad for them too.
I think I feel sad for them in the way of, and maybe it is trying to live authentically, or maybe it is trying to be, like, know that there's other things in the world or other ways to live.
Yeah.
Or, like, experience life in a different way. But sometimes it feels like you're only experiencing it through that lens, or, like, through that narrative.
Yeah, and I think that's what feels so surface.
Yeah.
And I think that's what feels so surface in just like relationships, not even related to a religious setting, but a relationship where you could only have surface level conversations about, I mean, I don't know, like when I think of surface level, I think of people's inability to get deep, to be vulnerable, to say like, hey, this is what I'm really struggling with right now, or hey, I messed up. Right.
Repair,
or to tell the truth. Right. Which we talk a lot about in episode 4. So you guys need to go back and listen. But Rashell and I have this special relationship where we can say hard things to each other. And I think that is the opposite of surface level conversations.
I think so too.
Because you stay surface if you're worried about offending someone else, which that's what this person's talking about.
And I think you stay surface if you don't feel that you can be vulnerable with someone and be safe.
Yep. And safety is not even about physical safety.
No,
so like,
totally
expand on
emotional.
that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would think if I have surface level conversation or surface level relationship with someone, I'm not feeling that I can be vulnerable with that person. Right. When I think surface level, it's a lot of like, hey, how are you? What's going on? It's kind of, these are things you need to know about me. Maybe this is what's kind of happening in my life, but there's not a lot of depth. I mean, it's on the surface, so it's kind of like, yeah, this is just kind of what's happening right now. But I'm not going to say this is happening and this is how I'm feeling about it. Or this is happening and this is what I want to do about it. Or like, this stuff is really scary and it's really hard for me. How can I, how can you help me? Or even if you have that, I think that more authentic relationship with someone, it's like, hey, are you okay? What's going on with you? How do I support you? How do I help you? I think a lot of times the surface level, and I'm kind of thinking back to like this idea of like this family, like I'm kind of thinking about, different relationships I have, and even with people who are still like family members who are still in the church, I might think like when I think about this surface level, I'm thinking I'm not going to have this like deep conversation with them about something I'm struggling with because, and this is all my stuff, but like I feel like they have already this perception of what I should do or how I should be. And so I'm not going to maybe share some of that because, like if I'm struggling with something, it's like, what's the answer? Just have faith.
Pray
about it.
Yeah.
Right? Something like that instead of, hey man, like what do you need? Like what's going on?
Yeah,
like,
no,
how
and
do I support you.
And I'm thinking about too I'm thinking about like if I am having a conversation with someone, I'm thinking of a particular person, and I tread very cautiously with that family member who's a member of the church, because I also know how I'm speaking about the church.
Right.
So
right.
I tread very cautiously.
Right. Because I don't want to offend.
Exactly. I don't want to be disrespectful or rude.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about this person that wrote in too, and like, how then do you navigate that? And I think for me, it's twofold. It's one, you have to personally deal with your own activation, like your own pain that's coming up. You have to hold space for that. You have to grieve maybe the depth that your relationships are not going to have. And I think being mindful of what are like your boundaries. What are you comfortable sharing? Because that was kind of when you were sharing and you were talking about like you're not going to give the full explanation of how you're doing. And I think that's an okay boundary to have in these type of relationships because you don't want to overshare if it's not safe.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important, like, I think there's a way to exist in these family dynamics in a way that is supportive to you, but also with boundaries. And those boundaries can be a time limit too. Or a boundary where you just leave and take space.
And I think leaving, taking space. I mean, even as we're sitting here talking, I'm thinking about this person. I think find someone you can, right? There's people out there that you can have that authentic relationship with, and maybe it's not our families, because I think so often we grow up or we are with our family, and we think it's all supposed to be one way, and you can kind of keep thinking that way, right? Like, yeah, this is how it's supposed to be, so I'm just going to stay in my role and stay in this lane, and this is the family that I'm in, and I have to act a certain way. But I think what happens is, I mean, this just reminds me so much, right, of like changing, when you kind of change your role in the family system, or something happens in the family system and you move out of that, you don't feel very safe in how you're showing up, because you're not able to show up authentically, and it's a different role, and people are going to respond to you differently. And then I think when you add the added of, if you've left the church and you've got to have that conversation to people who are still very, devout, and who really are totally in, that's just a hard way to go. Like, just a hard place to be in.
Absolutely. And I don't even know, like, you might not even be able to have that conversation
Right.
with them. And I don't think you necessarily have to, but I do agree so wholeheartedly with what Rachelle's saying, that it's so important to seek out people that you can show up authentically with. And we don't get to choose our family, but we do get to choose our friends.
Yes.
And I think,
thank God. Right.
Exactly. No. And this isn't to say like that we need to, shove our family to the side, but you also have to have boundaries, and you have to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And when you do maybe shift some things in your life and how you show up, and you've kind of broken some of those maybe more harmful cycles for yourself personally, right? Because your family members don't think that the church is harmful for them, but you do, or whatever. You have to renegotiate how you spend your time in those relationships. And some of that renegotiation is, well, I'm actually going to do this with my friends who I can show up authentically with and be myself with, and have those conversations. And then that gets to fill that need that you're not getting met in your family.
Right. Because I think you still have to have, or you still want to, or you hope, right, that you have relationships with your family, even if you believe differently.
Yes. And
so, you don't want to totally, it's hard, because I think if people are expecting you to, like, either, be what they want you to be, and you don't want to be, or you're out of the family. I mean, that's a really, I guess, a different topic, different kind of question. I think there's people who are like that. Or if you want to just, hey, this is just how I believe, we don't have to talk about it. And sometimes that's kind of where it goes, I think, sometimes too, right? Like, you can feel sad that I'm not in anymore, and I can feel sad you're still in, and we can still have a relationship.
Yeah, two things can be true at once.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Good for submission. Thank you.
Yeah, I like that one.
All right, I'll read the next one. I'm giggling already.
Oh man.
What to do if my partner's sexual fantasies give me the ick? We're going lots of places today.
We are. This is a good one.
He said he would have sex with my mom if there were no repercussions. Our marriage is already rocky at the moment, and I'm totally turned off by this.
There's a lot, I feel like, to unpack in this. It's like a three sentence like submission. I feel like there's so much in there.
There's so much. I mean, first of all, the fact that he feels safe enough to share his sexual fantasies with you is, I'm going to give him that. Because that's a really, and especially like, that's a really, like, you have to be feeling pretty secure in the relationship to be able to share that.
And I'm curious if he's talked about it multiple times, or if it's been like
just a one-time share.
Like, yeah, like, or I'm just messing around. I'd have sex with your mom.
Yeah, I think we need more.
We don't know that. There's not a lot. Yeah, I don't want to.
We need more context for sure. I think the part. Have you shared with him that it gives you the ick? That's what comes up for me.
Yeah, that's kind of mine too. And like, that's my mom. Why do you feel that way about my mom?
Yeah. I mean, I think like there's this whole other component too in the way. I mean, how men are socialized, but how men work too, and they are a lot different than women, and their fantasies are a lot different. And I think they think about having sex with all kinds of Like,
I think, yeah.
Like all the time with with a lot of women. And I don't even know if it's like, it's conscious. I think it'll show up in their dreams. And there is that element to it. I also get really curious about this person's, how you feel about your own sexuality and your own sexual fantasies. Can you have sexual fantasies? Because you might find that you're a little activated by your partner having sexual fantasies because you don't feel like you're allowed to have sexual fantasies. Obviously, these ones, it is a little bit complicated because he's talking about your mom.
Right.
And you're allowed to, and I want to say you're allowed to be icked out by that.
I think so, 100%.
I think the conversation starts with your partner.
Right. I think having that conversation about, why are you telling me this? Right. There's kind of that, and where's it coming from? Mm-hmm. And don't you kind of think too? What's some of the major issues that people have, or major reasons people have problems in their marriage? Right. It's sex. Mm-hmm. How much or how little, right? And money and like kids, right? Like, isn't that kind of like the top three or whatever? You're the LMFT, so you tell me.
I don't do couples work, you know this.
I was just kidding. I'm just joking.
We're not the sex experts.
No, we're not sex experts.
But I will say, if you want, like, go listen to the previous episode.
Yes, that is true.
Episode 15.
That's more of a...
With the sex therapist, Amy Mortensen, that I interviewed, because she offers a little more insight into this. We talk about the more of the parenting element, but I'm already planning to have Amy back on to do sex-related questions. So keep those, if you're listening, keep those in mind, because I will be revisiting sex questions in the future. I still really appreciated this submission.
I like this submission. I like it because I think it does. Again, if we go back to like vulnerability, and I really hope she has a real conversation with her husband.
Me too.
Just about communication and how they're talking about sex in their life, in their marriage, in their partnership, and also, I think figure out what's really happening, and is she really? What does she need in that marriage? Like, that's the one thing that keeps going up for me too. Is like, what is she not getting right in this relationship that she also? Because to me, it feels like there's a lot more. So I hope she can explore that.
Absolutely. As someone, I have been pretty activated by my partner's sexual desire, and diving into that and exploring it. I've realized it's so much of my stuff.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And has had nothing to do with him, and kind of getting that clarity and understanding shifted so much in our dynamic. And it got there, one, like, because we can have open, honest conversations, but also to my ability to have curious exploration of like, why is this making me icked out, or why is this hard for me? And I think it's a both and, for sure. Great submission. All right, Rashell, do the next one.
I really don't know what to do. I don't want to be around my family because I am struggling with the fact that my life could have been so different if I had been given the opportunity to be myself, or even explore and get to know who I am as a person. Instead, I had to follow the rules of the LDS Church, and the amount of love I was given was equated to the level of worthiness I held. I avoid my family because I have so much anger, and I want to release all of it and express all the ways that they let me down, but then I struggle with the feeling of that not being fair to them, even if I feel justified in doing it.
What's coming up for me is just how valid all of that is. Mm-hmm. And I think there is a way to work through that anger, and you don't have to say it all to them.
No.
I think there's so many methods of getting in touch with that anger, even if it's just like writing everything out that you ever would want to say. You don't ever have to read it or share it with them, but just the act of like purging it from your system, because it's valid. And I often tell people, because I have a lot of people that are like, well, I don't want to be angry at my parents, or I don't want to do processing because I don't want to be angry at my parents. Yeah. And if you're repressing that anger, it's just going to it's stuck, it's stagnant. And you almost have to allow yourself, in my opinion, to be angry, to get angry, to be angry at them, not necessarily at them, but like within your own self and your own processing, so that you can move through it and get to what's underneath the anger, because I find that most times there's something underneath the anger.
There's a lot. It's the anger iceberg. That's like that's a cliche, right? No, one thing that came up for me though as we're sitting here is it's like that whole regret thing, right? My life could have been so different. And I mean, honestly, yes, your life, if you were, raised in a house that didn't practice the LDS faith or, did something different, yeah, your life would have been different. But also, like, you can start now with, like, what you want to do now, right? And maybe that's just my, like, way of, like, looking at things, but, yeah, if you felt like you weren't given the opportunity to be yourself, like, now's your time. Like, now's your chance. Mm-hmm. Like, be who you want to be.
I've been talking about this a lot with clients. I think it's sometimes, I don't know, Rashell, if you notice this, but I feel like sometimes there's like themes.
Oh, yeah.
For everyone's kind of going through the same thing
right.
in their own way. And so I've noticed that this is like a theme, this regret theme of, in the grief of, well, if I would have known, if I would have had things different, if I wouldn't have been raised in the church, I would be different. And yeah, you're right. And also, you are only who you are now, mm-hmm. right now in this moment, because of all of the experiences that got you there.
Oh, exactly.
And so it's really important to kind of hold space for that, because you can't change it.
No.
And I think even I've really dove into this a lot, because even I would say even in the last like 6 months, I've had to confront Mormonism a lot differently. Mm-hmm. And I've had to be like, well, it actually is a part of who I am. As much as I had disliked it or rejected it, it was a part of my life for 20 years.
Yeah.
And shaped a lot of the things and the experiences that I had, and good and bad ways. It is what it is, but I can't hate it, because then I'm hating a part of myself. And I can wish it was different at times. And I think allowing yourself to grieve is so important, like to allow yourself to grieve the life that maybe you didn't have, or some of the choices that you didn't make. And also, and I've said this to so many clients, like just recently, like you're only able to say what you're saying right now because of everywhere you came before it. I'm only able to hold space or show up in the way that I am now because of everything that came before me.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, think about, I guess, I always look at it, would you be as grateful or like thankful for like who you are now and who you're trying to be if you hadn't had all these other things?
No.
Right? You wouldn't have the insight or the awareness and without some of these life experiences. And so, I mean, I think, you have the opportunity now, kind of like seize it now, because you can be kind of that person. And yeah, I mean, be mad. You can always be mad.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think the anger will cycle through and show up. I often talk about how healing is like the stages of grief in general.
I think so.
And you go through phases of it where you are feeling like you have acceptance, and then you go back to feeling angry or in denial. And it's just like this process that's going to ebb and flow probably for your whole life in some capacity. There are days where I get really angry. There are days where I'm so fucking pissed at the Mormon church that I just like want it to go away. Mm-hmm. But if it goes away, then I'm not here. You're not here. I mean, so many really important people in my life, right? Because it's a part of our lineage, it's a part of our history. So I think that reframe is really important. Right.
And I think, I mean, you talk about the lineage piece, and I think about that a lot, right? Like I think about, oh man, like these pioneers, right, believed in this so much. They came they came from Europe to Utah, and that's for something they believed in. And I guess would I do something similar for something I believe in now? Maybe, if I believe something that strong.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I feel like
I think about it.
No, I mean, I feel like I believe that's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
I believe in it so strongly.
Yeah.
Right. So it's an interesting thing to think about. But how do we integrate it? How do we have some more acceptance? Because it is a part of us. And I think even envisioning as you like seize the day right now, so you're like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, I'm going to do that. Like envision like going back and bringing some of those parts with you.
Yes.
You know, you can go back and reparent or go spend time with your adolescent self. And it sounds maybe kind of woo-woo, but it's really powerful to think about.
When I think about that, like, I keep coming back to this equated to the level, like, the amount of love I was given was equated to the level of worthiness I held. And I think we can all relate to that in so many ways. Like, I know I can, like, and that's a really crappy thing, I think, to feel as an adolescent, as a teenager. So you're right. Like, maybe you have to go back to that person and be like, you were loved no matter what, right? Like, going back to that younger teen and being like, it doesn't matter what you did, you were loved no matter what.
Yeah. And everything you feel is real and valid. And I also think it's so important to not unpack and live there.
Yeah.
Because that's going to take you out of, like, you know, there's this like regret for what you didn't have. But if you spend your time regretting it, then you're not right here in the here and now to take advantage of what you know. And you only know what you know now because of where you came from.
Yeah.
That was a great submission. Okay, next one. I was raising my kids in the LDS church. 3 sets of grandparents were thrilled by this. I recently stopped believing, stopped attending. Kids have stopped as well. Not ready to tell grandparents, but I feel responsible to share sooner rather than later with grandparents so the conversation don't fall on my kids' shoulders when they don't go on missions, temple marriage, etc. I'm worrying about will I get up the nerves to tell them in time so that I'm taking accountability and not kicking the can down the road so it lands on my kids.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
I mean, I always think sometimes I'm like, how old are your kids? Right? I'm imagining that they're like maybe teenagers, right? Maybe they've been baptized, maybe they haven't, I don't know. Because they're talking more like missionary, missions and temple marriage. And, but I come back to, it's eventually going to come up, right? So if they're in high school and they're getting close to the end of their high school years, probably want to start having that conversation if you feel like you've got to say it and do it. So it's not on your kids' shoulders, because I do think in some ways, I don't know if I'd want the pressure on my kids to have to say that when they're sitting, we're at a family function and someone's like, well, have you put in your mission papers yet? Or something like that. And it's like, no, I haven't. And then they're looking at their parent like, what should I say? So I think it's like time and place. I think when it's ready, to me, I would know, like, okay, right? Like, I don't want to be at or if they have a cousin or something that's getting ready to go on a mission, it might be a good time to have that conversation later. Like, hey, just so you know, my kids probably won't be ever going on. Like, we're out.
Yeah. What's coming up for me too? I'm thinking about this book, the Book of Boundaries I just read, and she kind of taught one of the ways she talks about like a green boundary, yellow boundary, and a red boundary. And a lot of times with the green one, it's like kind of giving the heads up. And that's what I was kind of thinking when you were talking. It's more like, I don't know if you need to start with a sit down conversation of like, I don't think so, hey, like my kids aren't going to go on, like we're out of the church. I don't think it needs to be that deep, because then, probably not. And that's what she kind of talks about, is like, the more you explain, the more they can counter. Yeah. Whereas if it's just like, I'm just going to use the example, you're going to a mission farewell, or like you're going to go to dinner and your cousins, what do? They open their mission, their call. Yeah, they open their mission call. Yeah. So you're going to go to that event as a family, but maybe before you go, it's like, hey, I'm just letting you know that so-and-so is not going on a mission because we're not going to church, and I don't really want it to be brought up, and know that if it's brought up, we're going to be leaving. Right. Like, so you kind of preface it before.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah.
You ever even get there.
It's kind of like, here it is, right?
Yeah, like, here it is, and I'm not gonna, and I don't think you need to explain yourself. It's like, here it is, just so you know, I'm not gonna talk about it further. Yeah. I don't think you say it in that tone, but you don't really want to, if you give a whole bunch of explanation as to why you're not going to church, why they're not going on missions, then that opens a door for people to be like questioning you and your choices. But it can just be very like, hey, very much of, hey, just letting you know, we haven't been attending church. My kids aren't going on missions. We're not going to be talking about it anymore. Yeah. Then they like bring it up. Hey, remember, we're not talking about the church stuff. And if we keep talking about it, we're going to leave the situation. Right. And then they bring it up again. We're not coming over today. Like it,
right?
Like it, it doesn't have to be that serious, but.
And I'm even thinking like to my own. I'm thinking like my own kids, right? As people in the family have had baptisms and things like that. It's we've just always done kind of the hey, like we'll come to the dinner after, but we're not going to the baptism.
Exactly. No, you don't even need to explain that.
And it's like, okay, and I feel like people just get it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's why we're not going. Like, yeah, I'll go to the dinner. I'll celebrate it with you guys, whatever. But we're not going to baptism. Like, I'm not taking my kids to the baptism.
Yeah. And why we're saying this, I'm just going to recognize that I think this is actually very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
In just in general, but also especially in Mormon culture, LDS culture, because you are a lot of times socialized to be a people pleaser.
Oh, yeah.
Very much so. So it's really difficult to think about telling someone something like this.
Well, I think people pleasing and not wanting to disappoint. I guess it's the same thing. You don't want to disappoint if you're a people pleaser, but that's what I think of a lot is like just that disappointment or what's everybody going to say when all these this family's not here, but everybody else is. And,
yep.
How's that going to be? Are we going to be judged on that? That's
yeah.
what comes up for me.
For sure. No, I would just really encourage this person to. I like what you said, Rashell, about you'll know when the time is right.
Mm-hmm.
And to be curious and open to that. And I do think that the boundary should come from you to grandparents.
I always feel like that's a lot to put on kids.
Absolutely. Even older kids. Yeah. But it's not something they need to be worrying about.
No. Yeah. I mean,
it also might be helpful too, though, depending on their age, to give them some language too, some boundary language to set. Because I think about all types of scenarios and just how this culture works and the enmeshed nature of it. You tell grandparents, hey, we're not going to church. Kids aren't going on a mission. Grandparents go behind you.
Yeah, and talk to the kids.
Yeah. So I do think you have to prep the kids too.
No, I think so. And I've even thought about that with my own kids. As they're growing up, it's like, well, why don't we go to church? And of course, the answer has changed from my youngest to my oldest. Right now, I think my oldest was like, because I don't want to go. Like that's not what I do. I'm not in the church. But this just makes me laugh because I remember when they were younger, I was like, no, we don't want to spend our Sundays at church, right? Like, or as one of them said, we're not church people, so that's why we don't go.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard, but I think it's good for your kids to at least have something to kind of be there. Or hey, talk to my mom or talk to my dad.
Oh yeah, that's a great boundary. Just yeah.
I
didn't even think of that. So great.
Yeah.
Tell your kids if their grandparents ask them, you need to go talk to my mom about that.
Yeah, talk to my dad. Talk to my mom.
Yeah, I love that. All right, you got the next one.
Okay. My wife just started therapy from all of this, and her therapist told her, it sounds like you were grieving a life you didn't get to live. So again, that regret thing. We have both left the church together and have a wonderful marriage. How can I be there for her as she grieves the past she can't get back?
That's a great question.
I think for one, I love the support. Like that's the first thing I think of is just super cool that they have they've left together so they understand some of that. And it's like, I just think it's super commendable for this.
Yeah, that was, I actually got that as a DM and I said I have too many thoughts to put it in a word. So I'm going to add it to these submissions for this episode. And I think what I also want to say, just by like writing that question and you are supporting her. You like the person just even writing that question in, sure. Like you're already supporting her.
Right. Yeah, he's there for her, right?
And I also think too, just we live in such like a fix it culture. Like I want to try and take the pain away. I want to take the grief away. I want to fix it. I want to make it better. And there's just some things you can't fix, and you just kind of have to hold space for them and the emotions that come with them.
Right. Well, I think, to me, it just reminds me that it's such a process. It's the process, right? Whether we want to call it the grieving process or whatever. But I think, to me, it's just holding space. And I think knowing, right? It's like, this is really cool awareness, too, that this is what your wife's going through. this is what she's struggling with. And so, I just think about how does that impact other areas of our lives, right? Because it's like she's grieving stuff. It could impact your marriage, right? If you're married in the temple, and like I just think about just things like anniversaries and just things like just all that stuff is kind of it almost like brings you back to it every time, right? So then then all this like activation comes up about me grieving the past, and all the stuff in my past keeps coming up. And so I think just the fact that they're supportive of their wife.
Yeah, and I would say too to this person to make sure you're taking care of yourself too and your own activation, and like you get to be a better support to your wife the more you're supporting yourself. And checking in on yourself and checking in on your own being and how you're feeling and doing too. Like then you get to show up for her.
Right.
In a different way. And I also, this is a really hard thing to go through in a marriage, and that can feel scary, and things might change. And I also think when we go through hard things, whether it be related to church or not church, but I just think about the hard things I've gone through in my marriage and being able to work through them together and hold space. And not even necessarily like the marriage is having a hard time, but I went through a really, really big personal trauma in my family, and when I had postpartum, and I just think about how my husband held space for me, and it was rough sometimes for him,
right.
But like how much closer that brought us, like when
for sure.
When people can just show up for you and you are being so raw and vulnerable, and like you're in your like worst, and they're just like, I love you, I'm here for you, I believe you. There's so much power in that.
I think there is a lot of power. And I was even just thinking, as you were talking, and I was thinking about how our relationships evolve and like our marriages evolve with like all the different like life change, like stages of life, right? I think about like when my kids were little to like now as our life's evolving, and my kids are bigger, and like we have actually probably more time together sometimes, so like I also think about not so much like grieving a life you didn't get to live, but again it's like as it evolves into this other thing, and you have this wonderful, as you describe it, like a wonderful marriage, like how do you again it just reminds me of that, like how do we move forward and like keep it that way, like what's the next stage of our of like how we evolve, like where does it go from here?
Yeah, I mean, an evolution in this movement piece, I think it's like the essence of healing, but it's the essence of being human. And if we're stagnant, when I think of stagnancy, I think of not falling down, not making mistakes, just kind of like just there and not having hard things happen. And so looking at this as an opportunity to find that movement, to grow, to evolve, because that is what will bring you closer, more connected.
Yeah.
Than just doing the same thing.
Right.
Which is why, and I've heard this quite a bit, I don't work with couples, but I've heard quite a bit that when couples go through this together, they do become closer and have a deeper connection, because you're confronting and working through really hard things. Right. And you have to move to do that.
Well, and I think too, like and this is a lot just like how I view things, but it's like, what do you learn? What do you take from that? And I think there's been times, in like my own marriage and like relationship of like, oh, I really like, no, like he really does love me that much. Right. Like,
yeah,
like there's like, oh yeah, okay. Like, but he's there, but it's like this sense of security almost in a way, like you're there, we're in it, we're together, we're moving, we're doing it together.
Yeah. There's power in that.
Yeah, I think so.
As soon as I moved out at 19 and never went to church again, all my family and friend relationships changed. Now, 20 years later, I personally still feel so awkward around church members I grew up around, small town life. And I feel like me and my life and my family/kids are under a microscope and judged and then worried what conversations are being had behind closed doors. Because I remember how they would talk about people that left the church before. My entire family remains devout and have learned to respect my boundaries to a degree. But that constant judge feeling just just never seems to leave me in those situations. And the worry about it for my kids as they go to school with the LDS kids that know mine don't go, mind you, I've never taken them.
That's so hard.
I know.
I can relate.
I know. I was like, this actually is a great one for Rashell and I to dive into. But I think Rashell specifically, because if you don't know, Rashell was raised a member of the church, is not a member, and has never been a member with her. Like your kids have never.
My kids have never been in a church. I like to say other than for funerals. That's like it. The only time they've really been in a church building is for a funeral, but it's just in a stake center. And I get it. I know this, right? We know this. And I think too, if you listen to like our episode where we talk about, I think our experiences in the church, I know that judged feeling. Like I'm feeling it right now.
Me too.
Like as we're talking about
when I read the submission,
it's
I was like,
I am like, oh my God, like I know exactly what that person's talking about. I know exactly what they're thinking. And it's interesting because as I have 3 kids. My oldest is a senior in high school, and my youngest is in 5th grade. And I feel like I've seen it all. You know, I've been at the places where I've been at the schools, and it's like they know I don't go to church. Like, you know, like they know I don't. They know my kids don't. Neighborhood type things. My absolute favorite thing is I've lived in the same house for 10 years and have people I see at different like school events or something say, "You live by me?" I didn't know that you lived by me. And I'm like, yeah, man, I would like drive by your house every day. Like, but yeah. Because we're not in the, and then it's that judgment feeling, right, that comes up. And so, yeah, I just think, and I think in a lot of ways, and this is really crappy, and I hate even saying this, but in some ways I just had to get like a thick skin about it. Like, that's your choice. This is not my choice. I mean, my choice was to not have my kids raised that way. And I do feel bad. I do think there's probably been times in my life that my kids have missed out, maybe like hanging out with certain kids or doing things with people because we were not a part of the church. And I know that that's happened. And I know that there is discussion around it. But again, I think for me, I look at it as that I really hope that they give the opportunity to meet my kids or like to meet us and realize, hey, we're actually not that bad. And try to almost like, sometimes I think people who are so ingrained in the church think because we don't go to church, we drink all the time, or we're like bad people and we're doing all these crazy things. And it's like, no, that's not what we do. Right? Like,
not at all.
We're really structured. We have a lot of things going on. We're really good people. I would always try to lend a hand to help whatever, but yeah, no, I think it's super hard because you know that judgment. I mean, I know exactly how it feels, and I know that, and you worry about your kids, and you worry about if they're going to have friends or if people are going to be nice to them. And I do think, at least for Cedar, I think it's changed a lot. I think people have gotten, a little more open and like tolerant of it. Sometimes it's still not, right? Sometimes it's still there. And, but I have laughed. There have been times where my kids are like, this friend of mine, they don't go to church. And there's a part of me, it's like, cool. Yeah. They can come over whenever. Right?
You start,
like, cool, you can go to their house. Yeah.
It starts to go both ways. Yeah. Like I will just own this. You start to notice who are your people and who are not your people.
Right. No, you do.
You do. You start to notice those things because it's hard not to in this culture. It's under a microscope. And I feel that judgment. I felt that judgment tonight. My son is doing a sport and we're going to like practice, and there's a couple moms in there, and I can just feel it. Like I can just feel it energetically. And I feel like that was a lot harder for me when I was younger and in high school. Like that was brutal. Yeah, that was one of the hardest parts about living in Cedar, or a small town Utah. But now I still feel it.
Oh yeah.
And so I think it's about checking it energetically and then noticing, okay, like, do I really care what they think about me? You know? Right. And I think it's hard because you worry about your kids. And I've thought about this a lot. I think about this all the time. What's going to happen with my kids? are people going to be mean to them? Are they not going to be allowed to hang out with them? And that all might happen.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's going to happen. And people are going to be mean to my kids no matter where I live. There's going to be hard things. And I think one of the best opportunities we get as a parent is to help our kids through hard things. As one of the best gifts we get.
Navigate them. Help them navigate.
Because they're going to have hard things for forever. And when my kids have hard things in the future, I want them to learn how to treat people. And they're going to learn a lot when people treat them poorly for a reason that makes no sense.
Right.
Another thing that came up for me in this submission is when I have found myself personally, or I'm working with clients that have these really big fears of judgment, or like people are judging, other people are judging me. I get really curious if you're judging yourself. Because I think when we're giving that judgment to ourselves and we're already like being super hard on ourselves and super judgy on ourselves, we are like extra sensitive to everything that's happening around us, but we're not cognizant that we're doing it to ourselves. We're just fixated outwardly, because it's much easier to fixate outwardly than to be able to kind of call ourselves out and soften, if that makes sense.
No, I think it totally makes sense. I think there's a place where, I said, like, kind of almost have like a thicker skin or this other thing, because I think I try really hard, I think, and intentionally not to try to judge them, right? And because I think a lot of times if I feel like I'm having judgment on other people, I'm really going to be more aware if I think they're judging me, right? So it's like, well, okay, if you want to feel that way, cool. Like, like I said, we're going to live our life, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it's about softening and noticing if you are having judgments towards yourself. And I think it's really hard not to when you grew up in a culture like this that taught you how to judge so well. Judgment almost, in my opinion, becomes a way of keeping ourselves in check. Like, so we're judging ourselves so harshly, then we're judging everyone. That's how we manage the distress of such a high control system. Yeah. And so in those moments when you feel like people are judging you a lot, I would invite you to pause and step back and be like, what am I thinking about myself right now? What am I saying to myself right now? How do I feel about the choices and decisions I'm making? Because that's what I come down to. If I know, like for example, today, how I felt with that energy, what grounded me is I know how I'm showing up in the world. I know what I'm teaching my kids. I know that I'm a good person, even if those girls don't think I am. Right. And that's what grounds me. And so find that solid ground within yourself. Like, find that solid trust within your own being that you're confident in who you are. And that's not going to be perfect all the time. No. I don't feel that all the time. But I think circling back to that, because you will never have power and control however other people feel about you, but you do have power and control how you feel about yourself. I
think you could talk about gossip and you could talk about judgment all day in a small town. Yeah, you could probably do a whole podcast about judgment.
I could. It's so real, and it's really. The more I take care of my own being and my own like inner work, have solid friendships where I feel safe, the less I worry about that.
No, I agree. I think if you feel solid in your other relationships, and I think too. We talk about like curiosity, and I think it's always that curiosity piece of like, do I need to know what they're thinking, like, and what difference is it gonna make if I know how they feel?
True.
Okay, I don't want being ex-Mormon to define my personality, but it's hard not to talk about it. Sometimes I feel like I'm not moving on. How can I heal while also acknowledging what happened to me over the past 30 plus years?
What's coming up for me is what we talked about earlier. Like, it might have been the very first question though, about it's like this need to be like ex-Mormon, and maybe it's really reframing that. Because I've called myself ex-Mormon maybe to jump on the like trends, but I don't really like embody ex-Mormonism. Like I kind of am looking at it, and in this evolution of. I was raised Mormon, and that's a part of me, but that's not who I am. I don't know if that's even making sense.
No, I think so.
Because do you identify as ex-Mormon?
No, not really.
And you're ex-Mormon. I mean, we're both ex-Mormon by like paper standards.
Yeah. I mean, like totally, right? Like we have the documentation to prove it, right?
Yeah, it just feels like
Yeah.
another label. It feels like I'm Mormon or now I'm ex-Mormon. And I think we want one of those, especially, when you're deconstructing, because those labels feel safe. Mm-hmm. And just it almost like allowing it to be more fluid.
And I think one thing that just comes up for me as we're sitting here is I'm like, this is total, like, this reminds me of when you live in these communities, so whether it's Utah or somewhere else, sometimes you feel like you've got to jump into one of those, right? As you go to like all these different, whether it's school functions or you're out with like friends or I don't know. So sometimes it just feels like you have to, maybe it's because we put people in boxes and we do all these things, but do I have to be ex-Mormon because I'm not Mormon? And it's hard too, I think, when you meet people from, you've probably experienced this, right? When you meet people from outside of Utah for the first time, like you're traveling or doing something and they're like, where are you from? And you're like, oh, I'm from Utah.
And they are like, are you Mormon?
Like, are you Mormon? And it's like,
no.
But then if you say, no, I'm not, then it's like, well, why?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to. A lot of times I'll just say, like, I used to be. That's
what I have to say a lot of times. Like, well, I was raised that way.
Yeah.
Right, I was raised, I used to be.
And it's so funny, too, because I don't take any pride. I don't want to be called Mormon.
Right.
I don't want people to think I'm Mormon.
No, I don't either. That's why we've gotten so many tattoos, I think.
Yeah, no, it's like an out. Like, no, I know. That's what I'm saying. I love, that's what I was talking about, finding my people. I'm like, who has some tattoos on their body? Who's wearing a tank top?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, this is, what, can you read the submission again? Because there was a couple other things that were coming up for me.
I don't want being ex-Mormon to define my personality, but it's hard not to talk about it. Sometimes I feel like I'm not moving on. How can I heal while also acknowledging what happened to me over the past 30 plus years?
Yeah, I'm hearing some absolutes that I don't think are necessary. You can talk about your experiences, and that doesn't mean you haven't healed.
And it doesn't mean that's who you are.
Doesn't mean that does not define you. I mean, honestly, your experiences are a part of your story, and they deserve respect, and they deserve to be honored, and they deserve to be talked about and felt.
And I'm also thinking, like, this is somebody who was in the church for at least 30 years.
Oh, long ass time.
Right. So, you're not going to get over that. We don't get over a loss in a day, in a week, in a month, in a year.
Yeah, I don't know if we ever get over it.
Right.
I think we reintegrate it and we move forward. But I think we only move forward by taking stock and feeling our feelings and try not to judge that. Just because you are like feeling good one day and then you're like, God, I'm just so activated or triggered by the things that happen in the church doesn't cancel out the other.
And I even think about that. I mean, you talk about absolutes, and that makes me think of like, what does moving on really mean for you? Mm-hmm. Right? Like, what would that really look like? Because you're also not going to get rid of 30 years of your life. But yeah, I mean, I would just think like maybe moving on is just that you're just like, well, sometimes, I mean, I'm not an ex-Mormon. That's not who I am.
But I am an ex-Mormon too.
But I am an ex-Mormon too. But I guess to me, it's like, what does moving on really look like? Yeah,
that's a great question, I think, to really ask and sit with.
Because I think it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I'm having a little bit of a process too, and I'm like, yeah, but I am ex-Mormon. Like I'm like, right, no, but I am, because I don't want to be called Mormon, but I don't feel like. Here's what I want to say: ex-Mormonism is only like one tiny piece of my identity, and so what else is a part of who you are, And as you think about healing and processing and deconstructing, like ex-Mormonism is a part of you. Mm-hmm. Just like Mormonism is a part of you, but what about everything else? All the other things you do in your life, the experiences you've had. When I kind of think about my story, there's so many points on that, which is why I don't feel like I'm like over-identifying with ex-Mormonism.
Right. Well, and I also think this part about like acknowledging what happened to me and healing at the same time, I mean, it's just that, right? A lot of times it is just acknowledging. And I think, for some people too, it's like both, right? There were probably good times and there were probably bad times. I mean, and church related stuff. I had fun sometimes. Right? I mean, I had some good things. I had some fun times at like camps and like things like that, and like I met some really cool people. I mean, so I think there's like and then there's some other really not so great things that happened. I mean, so I think it's like you can acknowledge both.
Yeah, I really don't think the church is all bad.
No,
not at all. Even as someone who sees the harm so significantly all the time, I don't think it's all bad. I mean, even for myself, like I remember, because I had such a hard time falling asleep at night, but I had this like cassette player and I would play primary songs every night to go to sleep. I'd pray every night to go to sleep. And like sometimes it's so weird now, like I haven't had anything to do with the church in a very long time, but like on nights where I can't go to sleep and I'm struggling, I almost feel like I say like, "Dear Heavenly Father," like, and I'm like, why am I saying that? But it was soothing to me as a little kid,
right?
Whether that was a trauma response or not, it doesn't really matter because it was. I didn't think it was like a negative thing when it was happening when I was a little girl.
Right. Well, I think too, like I had some cool. I had some kind of cool experiences. I had some, cool leaders, I think, back in the day that I just knew loved me and cared about us. But I think that was just who they were as people, and I still see them today and I still feel, in a lot of ways I'd still feel that with them. But I think they're just really good people.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always like my biggest piece is trying to stay out of the black and white, the all or nothing, which is very much how religion is. It's very all or nothing. And so when you're deconstructing, you tend to do that too. But two things can be true. Hold space for both. And it's not easy.
No, it's not. And I hear like this person really wants to heal. And yeah, a lot of things happen to you and you want to heal. And I think it can be like hand in hand, right?
Yeah. And I think just this is what healing looks like. It is messy and complicated, and you're going to swing both directions to hopefully come back to the middle ground. All right, these are some great submissions. Oh, this one was meant for me.
All right.
Rashell, I just handed Rashell and I a paper. I didn't even just put these out, so it was meant for me to read this. How to heal enough from purity culture to be able to wear crop tops to work.
This is for you.
I'm so ingrained. It seems unprofessional, but also wish I had the mindset to be able to do it. Would love examples of beliefs so I can shift mindset around it.
Crop top.
I am the crop top queen. It's I'm like, how did I get here? Because it's really only been the last few years. And I think that there's this huge component for me that has had nothing to do with purity culture. I think it's had something to do with purity culture and how purity culture made me view my body. But what is allowing me to wear the clothes that I wear now is because I've healed my relationship or healing my relationship. That's a long, I don't think we're ever healed, but I really worked on my relationship with my body, if that makes sense. And so that allows me to feel comfortable in whatever clothing I'm wearing. Yeah. And I think if I deconstruct what impacted my relationship with my body, purity culture is a part of that. And I have a really significant example because I fortunately grew up in a home where I could wear tank tops and bikinis. Like that wasn't
right.
We weren't modesty wasn't a thing, but you just kind of felt it when you live in small town Utah.
Yeah. We all know there's times you couldn't wear a two-piece to somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
But my dresses in high school were not modest. I did not wear modest clothing. But that wouldn't have been it, but I would have never worn a crop top.
Yeah.
That would have been really out there. So I remember, and I wouldn't wear a spaghetti strap. So my second summer home from college, one of my college friends came to visit, who's not Mormon at all. We would wear, you could imagine what we wore in college, right? And we went out to dinner and I was in a spaghetti strap and I was so uncomfortable. And that's the last time I really remember feeling
interesting
it to that degree. But I would say what allows me to embody it now is, that's why it's like so easy for me to put those crop tops on and like dance around and flip off people, essentially, because I have deconstructed and done so much work around my relationship with my body.
Yeah, I think you have to. Like, I mean, I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah, I don't, this is not, like, that's
yeah.
not easy. But I think also, too, you're shedding a lot. I also have a private practice. So first of all, I don't have a dress code. I can wear whatever I want. I'm not going to be wearing my crop top to where Rashell works. I just, first of all, there's a dress code, but I wouldn't feel safe doing that, you know?
Right.
But I still sometimes get really frustrated I get really frustrated with like dress code at high schools.
Yeah,
and like, I think it's ridiculous at high school.
Gets dress coded all the time.
Yeah. I think it's ridiculous that girls can't wear like leggings, or like, we're just sexualizing them by telling them what they can and cannot wear. I'm getting so off tangent to what this person asked about how do we wear crop tops? I mean, I don't know. What do you think, Rashell? Like, how do you kind of get comfortable wearing what you want to wear? Because I don't think it's about wearing a crop top. I think it's about wearing what makes you comfortable.
Right. And I think, I mean, I hated wearing dresses, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I hate wearing dresses. I don't like to wear dresses. I just have never liked them. Even when I was going to church and had to wear one, I just remember it being like this miserable experience, and I wasn't comfortable in it. But I had to do it because that's just what you did, right? And so, I still don't even know. I don't know why but I don't wear them. But I think over time, I'm like, I don't think it matters. I don't want to wear a dress. Big deal. Who cares? No. I have some nice dress pants. Cool. Awesome. But I think about, coming back to like, having all girls and all, I've never pushed that on them. Right. My oldest does wear whatever she wants. And
I love her for it. Rashell has all daughters, in case anyone's
girls
wondering that's listening.
So, and my oldest will wear crop tops and short shorts, and I'm just like, dude, wear it, because like, you should be proud of who you are, and that's just kind of always what you try to do, is just. So I think when you talk about, it's like, who cares? No one should care how you look.
No, you should.
Or what you look like. I want you just to be happy and comfortable in what you wear. Like, I would just be happy and comfortable in a pair of sandals and shorts and a sweatshirt all the time. Like, if I could just wear that every day, no matter what the weather was, I would totally do it. Right?
Yeah. And that's like, that's what's coming up for me. I would invite you to tune into what you want to wear and like what makes you comfortable. But like, again, like I said, I'm wearing crop tops to areas that I feel comfortable to wear crop tops. I was in San Diego for this work event, and I had to go essentially interview someone, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't wear a crop top to an interview because that was not appropriate, right? And so I think it's kind of playing with it in that regard. If you're allowed, if a crop top is allowed to be worn at your work and you feel comfortable doing that, I invite you to be curious about that. But I think sometimes we have to, if we want to play around with our clothing, maybe we should start in an area where we, like, just around your house.
Right.
Or like what has really allowed me to lean into this is I teach exercise in a hot studio. Mm-hmm. And I'm wearing literally a sports bra and leggings to teach. And I've just started, like, I just really have embraced that. And I remember when I first moved back to Utah and I would like wear that around on a walk, I would initially feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But now I'm like, no. Like, I did this in California all the time, and I never thought twice of it. Right. Just because I'm here and everyone's worrying about what people wear doesn't mean I have to take that on. Right. Anymore. Right. But that's not my story.
No, I don't think so.
But I do think it's like, maybe work's not the place to try your crop top on, but maybe your house is, or a date with like your partner. Right. Or hanging out with your girlfriends. Right. Just being curious.
Yeah, I think, just, and sometimes, I mean, I think it's just being comfortable with your body and who you are.
Yeah, and that you can wear whatever you want. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't have to be a crop top. You can be like, no dress. Like, if you don't want to wear dresses, if you want to wear shorts, like, just like what Rashell said, it's like, I really think about wearing what makes you feel comfortable and what you feel comfortable and confident in. I love that question.
I'm Pimo. Was that
physically in, mentally out.
Sorry, mentally out. I'm Pimo, and I'm too worldly for the Mormon guys and too religious for the normal guys. I just got asked out for the first time at 18, and then the dude turned out to be a total nut job. Kind of just goes along with your reel about grooming for marriage, I guess, because even though I don't want to get married right now, I feel like a failure for not even having been on a date at 18. And even more of a loser for being desperate enough to go out with a guy who wanted to plan a couples trip 2 days after I met him. How to say no to family, or maybe how to repel the guilt when I say no. I don't know what that means, that last part.
Maybe it was not the same question.
Maybe it's not the same question, yeah.
Yeah, that's a completely different.
It's like, yeah, so. Anyway.
Well, you just read that whole one again.
Yeah.
We'll edit this. Thanks, Carson.
Pimo, and I'm too worldly for Mormon guys and too religious for the normal guys. I just got asked out for the first time at 18, and then the dude turned out to be a total nut job. Kind of just goes along with your reel about grooming for marriage, I guess, because even though I don't want to get married right now, I feel like a failure for not even having been on a date at 18, and even more of a loser for being desperate enough to go out with a guy who wanted to plan a couples trip 2 days after I met him.
It's so funny because as I listen to this right now, I'm like, God, I wish that I wouldn't have gone out on a date before I was 18. Not because just because I was so obsessed with guys and dating and having a boyfriend growing up in this culture that I'm like, what would it have been like to not that's what I just want to say. There's nothing wrong with you not having gone out on a date yet. Right.
I'm kind of thinking ooh, were you doing other cool stuff, really involved in school? And no,
or
that's
sports,
what I'm thinking,
or
sports
friends,
and friends, you were having a good time and wasn't. And I get what she says. I'm too worldly for the Mormon guys and too religious for the normal guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is you're still what I'm hearing is you're still figuring out who you are and what you believe, and that's okay. And I think if you're feeling like you need to be doing anything, if you feel pressured to be doing anything, that I would really encourage you to pause, that you don't need to be doing that.
Yeah.
You don't need to be going on dates unless you want to be going on dates. You don't need to be worried about getting married unless that's what you want to be worrying about. I mean, at 18, you have so much life.
Oh, so much life
left to live and experience. And I just want to say there's a lot of fish in the sea and you don't have to settle.
Right. Well, I think about my own, I'm just going to throw in, I'm sure my kid will love that I'm telling stories, but I'm thinking about her, she didn't really have a serious boyfriend. And I remember before she got this serious boyfriend, she's 15, 16. She's just all my friends have a boyfriend. And I kind of it's kind of like a fact check too. I'm do all your friends really have boyfriends? And I remember saying to her, I don't care if you never have a serious boyfriend. The whole time you're in high school, I don't care if you ever do. Because I'd just rather you just hang out with a lot of different people. Just hang out, have fun. That's what high school's for. Hang out, have fun. She did end up with a serious boyfriend, and they dated for a little while, and then whatever, they broke up. But the one thing is I mean, yeah, I think there is still always that pressure of you need a boyfriend, you need a boyfriend, you need a boyfriend, you need a boyfriend, that I think we put on our kids a lot, and it's why?
Yeah.
Right? You don't need a boyfriend.
Yep.
You have the rest of your life.
I'm just going to say, I am so thankful I didn't marry any of my boyfriends until I met my husband.
Yeah, I would say that.
Because my life would be so different if I would have married any of my boyfriends.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think outside of Utah culture, people are not worrying about this.
Right. And I will also say, too, you may have dated a guy that was a total nut job. There are nut jobs out there. I mean, not trying to be, there are people who, as you're talking about this guy, I'm oh my God, is he a return missionary? And he's trying to be locked in so we can just move on and get married. But, and it's fine for you to tell somebody no, or you don't want to go out with them again. That's the whole thing about dating. Date to figure out who you want to be with.
Yep. Yeah, that's to what I said. I did date a lot of guys, so I knew what I wanted when I found what I wanted.
Right.
So it's not all bad.
No.
As you read the submission, I'm like, I'm having the regret of dating.
Well, and it's like, I feel bad, like, feeling like a failure for not ever having been on a date at 18, until 18. And I don't know, like I said, I honestly think that's great. And
me too.
I think too, like, it's okay at 18 to be figuring out who you are and what you want.
Yes, and that's what you should be doing.
Yeah.
How to say no to family, or maybe how to repel the guilt when I say no. That's a good question. I've been doing it quite a bit lately, and I've been feeling less and less guilt.
Good for you, but I think that's what happens.
Yeah, I think
the more no you say,
yeah,
the more you do it, the easier it gets, right?
Yeah. I'm a married person and I have 2 kids, and I have decided that I'm living for that family unit. Like, that family unit is what matters and what's important to me. So I don't always want to go to big family functions. That doesn't sound fun or exciting. And do I really need to build that family unit? So it becomes easier and easier to say no. I also have decided that it's what matters to me is I want family in my life that respect and love me and that are healthy people for me and my kids. And so I've gotten really comfortable saying no to situations that are not that without feeling guilty, because it's not about them. I think if you come from an enmeshed family, which an enmeshed family is a family that doesn't have boundaries, no is very hard. No is
super hard. It's like almost like absolving yourself of it. I mean, it's like kind of taking the guilt out of it. Like, I don't want to feel guilty about it. And maybe I kind of like look at it a little bit deeper of like, it's not guilt I'm feeling. I think that's kind of the surface level feeling sometimes is like guilt. It's deeper than that for me. So like, am I disappointing someone? Am I like, not keeping, to me it always comes back to like my roles and stuff in the family. Am I stepping away from these roles that I have and these things that I'm supposed to be and like, where I fit into my family. Because I know like sometimes some family stuff's easier to say no to than others, right? Yes. My husband's family is easier for me to say no to than my family of origin, right?
Yes.
Because that's just easier because they're not my family.
They're not your family.
They're his family. But yeah, I think you just have to keep doing it.
Yeah, you have to keep practicing, and I think you have to get curious about the guilt you're feeling. And I'm with you. Anytime people are like, I got to make this go away, I need to repel the guilt, and those kind of words, that's not possible, because we're humans, we're going to feel our feelings, and whenever we're trying to make something go away, it only gets stronger, in my opinion. So you have to be curious and open to what the feeling is, what is underneath it. Why, I'm feeling guilty, huh? Where do I notice I'm feeling guilty? What's that about? What's coming up for that? For me around that? Is there any shame?
Right.
Because I think shame and guilt get mixed up. So just being curious about that.
And I think sometimes it's like this thing, we want to be able to hold boundaries and not feel like consequences from it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, and I'm not saying that they're all bad, but it's like we kind of want to be able to say no and not have any unhappy consequences. Right?
Yeah, but
I think sometimes we think that way, like, I should be able to say no to this and you should be fine with me saying and like holding my boundary, right? And I just don't think that's always how it works.
No, I mean, because the thing is, you're powerless to how other people respond. And I think that's the way to I wonder if that's part of the activation. If you're saying no and then your mom's upset, maybe that's where your work needs to lie and not taking on your mom's feelings. Right. I'm just giving that example, right? Like, because I think as kids, especially if you come from a family where you can't say no, you do take responsibility for your parents' feelings. And, I can't disappoint them. I can't make them mad. Well, guess what? You are going to disappoint them and you are going to make them mad because you're human. And that's not your job. Their disappointment, they're mad, whatever they feel is their responsibility. And you have to get, and this is how I feel like I've been able to work through this. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. So I have to get comfortable knowing that me saying no might make my mom upset, might make my grandma upset, might make my siblings upset. And I have to be comfortable with that. And that's not always easy.
No.
But I think that's how you make progress with saying no.
Well, I think to me it's it reminds me of just this idea of like accepting it, right?
Yep.
Like if I make this choice that I'm going to say no to my family on this, or I'm, drawing this line, or I'm holding this boundary, I've got to accept whatever happens from there on out. Like I've made that choice. And that sometimes there's just some acceptance on the other side of that.
Yep. I would recommend the book of Boundaries by Melissa Urban for this person. It might be helpful just to give you some ideas on how to navigate it. She talks about in that book too, just like what the purpose of boundaries are, what the guilt is, how to work with that. So it's a good book.
Came out as gay as a 31-year-old woman. I've been happily married for 10 years with 2 kids. We left the church this year. Grieving being able to explore that side of me has been very interesting to unpack. I love my life, but I have hard feelings that because of how deep I was in the church, I was never able to explore that.
There's been lots of grief. A lot of people are grieving the life that they didn't get to live.
Right.
Which is super valid, and hopefully a lot of what we've covered will resonate.
I was just thinking, you were talking about themes, and you were talking about that, like, in Kessler, who worked with Kubler-Ross for the 5 stages of grief, came up with another one that was like the 6th stage, and he called it meaning of grief, like how to find meaning in your grief.
Oh, yeah.
And it's been, I don't know, it's just kind of cool, like, how do you find meaning in that? Like, what kind of meaning do you have from that? And, like, how can you take grief and then maybe almost, I don't know, make it have meaning in your life?
Yes.
Anyway,
I've
just been thinking about that.
No, I listened to him. He was on a podcast episode I listened to a while back, Brene Brown's podcast.
Yeah.
And it was really powerful. And one thing that stuck with me in what he said is that, because he had a son that passed.
Yeah, his son that passed away.
But one thing that really stuck with me is, like, he has made all this meaning out of it, and he's made all this growth and, like, all these connections.
Yeah.
And he still wished his son never died.
Right.
And so I think that's what this is. You're going to still wish this never happened, and that's okay. To me, that's part of the grief.
Yeah.
You're going to wish you could go back. You're going to wish you could have a redo. And that's okay. And so I think we get caught up in needing to change that, or needing to fix that, or needing to resolve it. And to me, it's just part of the process. It doesn't matter how much meaning you make. It doesn't matter how much you grow and shift and change. There's still going to be this thing that's hard that you maybe wish never happened. And I think about that all the time, even for myself. Like, and you and I have talked about this. I've already talked about this on the podcast, but like, just even with my parents and my parents' divorce, and like, I have grown so much as a person, as a human, like, and I don't want to go back.
Right.
I don't have any desire to go back. And also, there's still, I mean, just like a few days ago, I'm just like, God, it's just so sad. Like, I just want my, like, family.
Right.
And I just don't
think it to be the same.
I do, and I just don't think it's ever going to go away, and that's okay. And I think me being able to accept that, instead of I have to be okay with this reality.
Yeah. I mean, again, I feel bad, I hope this person does find kind of like that acceptance of themselves, which I feel like they do have, and being able to explore that. Like, you should be able to explore it. Like, if you came out as gay, explore it. I don't know. Like, that's how I look at it. If you can, you're still, from what I'm seeing is you're still married, so, like, you need to figure that stuff out.
With your partner. Yeah. But there's so many options. Like, there's so many ways to curiously explore that in this day and age, and different types of relationship dynamics. And I'm not a couples therapist, but there's a lot of resources out there to explore all kinds of relationships. So to me, it's both. It's grieving and holding space for that. But then how do you then pivot and make meaning with the here and now, and like what this grief has taught you and shown you and allowed you to realize too.
Right. Now what, right? How would you want to do?
Because if you stay in the place of regret and wishing it to be different, you actually miss out on like the gifts of the here and now.
It's true.
And I was actually thinking about this other night because I was journaling the other night. I was like activated about something that like annoys me. I'm like, I just don't want to be activated by it anymore. I just want it to go away. And I had this moment of, well, that I'm actually not noticing what I've learned from this activation. I'm not noticing what I've learned from this hard thing in my life.
Right.
Because I'm just trying to make it go away. Instead of being like, wow, actually, this has made me be a better friend. This has allowed me to show up better in my relationships. This has allowed me to be kinder and more mindful of what I say and do. And I think that's what, like, we want to wish it away or make it go away or get over it. And then we're so fixated on getting over it that we actually miss what's happening and, like, what we've learned from it.
Yeah.
To then integrate it. Like, that's the meaning. Okay, this is the last one I want to do because I just saw that they wrote in from Cedar. And since this is a Cedar City.
Oh, wow.
Cedar City podcast.
Wow.
Okay, raising our ex-LDS kids, 7 and 5, in Cedar. We left the church about 5 years ago, so my kids don't know much. We just moved here from California, and I'm nervous how we will navigate friendships, future dating, feeling left out, bowling, pressure to join, etc. I'm mostly nervous for my children, but also for myself. Well, let me know if you want to be friends.
That's right.
I like just I see this person so much. I've thought about this a lot. About raising kids in a culture that they're not LDS, we're not LDS, we're not ever going to be LDS. I'm laughing as I say this because I told someone the other day, I was like, that would be the only thing that would ever make me think about divorce if my husband was like, I want to go to church.
I can't imagine that happening.
No, it never will. You never will. But it's just like a funny thing to think about. For me, it's about finding your people.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Like, it's finding your people for sure, and which is gonna take time, especially if you just moved here. It took me some time.
Like, I think about trying to find just those opportunities, and I think too, be involved. Like, I think your kid's school sometimes can be a good place to find, and volunteering if you can at your kid's school, you're able to kind of pick out those kids a little bit better and get a good feel for who they are, and their parents, and. Yeah, I think, and it is scary. I think the kids, I do think that the kids can be mean, but I will also say I do think Cedar's a lot different than it was when we were growing up.
Yes.
I was growing up. I do think kids are a little more open, like nicer. I don't think you see as much of the, like, well, I'm not going to hang out with you if you're not LDS. My parents won't let me.
I think there's a lot more language to how how I'm gonna navigate that conversation with my children.
Yeah.
Because when I was growing up, it wasn't talked about how the LDS Church does have harmful parts. Like, that was not. Yeah. No one was saying that. That was a taboo thing to say.
Oh no, you wouldn't have said that.
You would never say. You would never be like. You would never even address it. That's why you're being excluded. But now, like, if that happens, that's such a great opportunity to have a conversation of, like, what exclusion looks like, how that feels, bias, like, right, all of that stuff that we don't always get the opportunity to talk about in a small town.
No, because you talk about exclusion and all these things, and it's like lessons, right, for like later down the road, because like your kid could be a mean person, like do something mean one day, not a mean person, but could do something one day, and it's like it's really good life lesson. Like, remember how that felt for you?
Yep.
When you didn't get invited, like, they're gonna feel the same, right? Or like, yeah, I mean, I don't know that necessarily. I don't know. I wouldn't say my kids have experienced a lot of like bullying necessarily, but. I think kids have been like rude about things at times. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's inevitable, and I think there is judgment, and there's going to be hard questions that they bring home. And it really comes down to like your confidence in yourself to have those conversations. And I think for myself personally, I feel really confident in my ability to have conversations with my kids about this community, this culture, and just hard things in general, obviously age appropriate, But how we have those conversations, again, when I grew up here, no one was having that type of conversation with me at all. No one was saying like, yeah, that's actually really inappropriate that so-and-so won't date you because you're not Mormon. No one was saying that, right?
Right.
Like, no one was saying like, oh, that's really inappropriate that Mormon boy was spreading those rumors about you. Like, no one was holding space for those types of conversations. Those weren't allowed. And I think it's very different now. And I know it'll be very different in my home. And that's, I think, what I really want to say to this person is you get to create that in your own home.
Well, I would say just have a story ready, right? Because I think, or a conversation ready in your head, because your kids, if they haven't experienced it, chances are they're going to come home one day and somebody's going to say, like, you're not LDS? Like, don't you know what that, don't you know what that means? Or you're not getting baptized, right? I've had those conversations with my kids, and you're right. Like, as they've gotten older, they're able to have, the language is different, and, a lot of times with my kids, I just say, yeah, we are choosing not to baptize you when you're 8. That's not something we're going to do.
Yep. Choosing not to.
We're choosing not to.
And I always think this too, like how you frame it and talk about it with your kids will be how they receive it too. Mm-hmm. So I shared this example on my stories, but my son is in kindergarten and one of his little girlfriends said, I'm going to marry you or my cousin. And my son, Bo, told me this. And I was like, oh, okay. We like kind of playful about it. Because, Bo knows what marriage is because me and his dad are married. But I just like talked about, I'm like, oh, do you remember how old me and your dad were when we got married?
Yeah.
And how old I was when you met your dad? And I was like, we probably don't meet who we're going to marry in kindergarten. And then we like move on from the conversation. I didn't be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's talked about marriage with you or the church or whatever it is, right? So it's like how we frame it. And then he just went on his merry way and like didn't think about it again. He doesn't even know what a girlfriend is. He doesn't really get it, So I think it's how we frame it as parents or how we make it a big deal. Like if your kids come home and say like, oh my gosh, so-and-so's making fun of me because I'm not getting baptized. Like how you approach that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, if you make it a big deal, like, oh, they're being bullied, they're going to be bullied. But if you pause, be like, oh, yeah, how did that make you feel? What's coming up for you? Do you want to know what baptism is?
Yeah.
Do you want to know why we don't do it? This is why we don't do it.
Right.
That's like... And then you move on. Mm-hmm. Or do you have any questions? Like, I think it's like, if we make it this big deal, then that's what's going to be a big deal for them.
And I've said stuff like, in other families, that's what they do. That's cool. Like, that's what they want to do.
Yes, I say every family is different.
Yeah, but this is what we're going to do in our house. And I've said stuff like, or if people have been mean, like, yeah, I wish they weren't mean to you about that, right? Like, that's not something to make fun of. Like,
Exactly. So, like, you validate their experience.
Right? Like, how did it make you feel?
Yes, I think we always I think the best place we can start is like, as a parent, how did that make you feel before we project our feelings on it? Because you're probably going to be having some feelings. I mean, I'm going to have some feelings. I had some feelings about the marriage thing. Mm-hmm. Bo, he did this like cheer thing. And then another
I remember you told me about that.
Yeah, a little boy at school was like, I knew the little boy was making fun of him, but Bo didn't know the little boy was making fun of him. So I didn't put that on him. I like checked myself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge part, and that's going to be a huge part for me in navigating conversations about the church with my kids. Like I'm going to have to rein myself in and not project my strong feelings onto them because it doesn't need to be a big deal for them.
Right. And I think too, like I've had some cool conversations with my oldest kid just about it, been able to talk kind of just more like, theory and like just like about religion and like so you kind of can have these cool conversations. And even like my middle one who's 13, but I think you can always have those if you've always had these conversations, right?
Yes.
Like if it's always been something easy to talk about and open to talk about, then yeah, you can come talk to me about it. And I might not tell you everything, but yeah, I mean, as my kids have gotten older, we've had different conversations about it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
And more in depth, right?
Yeah. And I you get to start that as little as you want.
And that's just like trying to be a good parent, just being open to your kids so they will come to you, right? But
yeah. And I'll go back to what I said earlier, like one of the best opportunities we get as parents is to help our kids through hard things.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how I've really been able to reframe and settle even my own nervous system about raising my kids in a culture with such a predominant religion.
Yep.
Because there's hard wherever you live.
Oh, yeah. It's just different hard.
Yeah, there's hard and scary things wherever you live, and you're going to have to figure out how to navigate them. And I will say this, like, Cedar is such a great place to raise a family. Mm-hmm. It genuinely is. And we get so much time together as a family because it is a small town, and my husband can work till 6 and be home by 6:10, you know?
Right.
And you get so much time together that I would not get in a big city.
Oh, no.
And I have to always come back to that on the days where I want to leave here.
Don't leave here. That's not okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, Rashell, thank you for sharing all your wisdom. This was really fun.
This was fun. This is awesome.
Everyone. Yeah. We'll bring you back, Rashell.
I'm sure.
Everyone, thank you for writing in. I love receiving all your submissions. I know we didn't get to every single one of them. We got to a lot. So the ones I didn't get to, I will save and table for next time. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in today. If today's content resonated with you, please share, leave a review, all the things. It would mean so much to me.